I thought I had the perfect life, a loving wife, 2 amazing kids, and a successful career, until the day I came home to find a note that shattered everything. What I discovered next turned my world upside down in ways I never saw coming. I never thought I'd find myself contemplating life without my wife. It always felt so far-fetched, so completely out of character for her. Rachel, Ray to those who knew her best, and I had built a life together that spanned decades. From being college sweethearts to raising 2 incredible kids, we weathered storms, celebrated milestones, and created memories that seemed unshakable. Over the course of more than 20 years, I believed our foundation was solid, immovable. But life has a cruel way of appending the very things you hold most dear, often when you least expect it. Just a few weeks ago, everything seemed ordinary. We were mapping out plans for a family trip, catching up on Josh and Emily's progress in college, and juggling our endlessly busy schedules. Yes, I had been preoccupied with work. There was a high-stakes trial that had consumed most of my attention. But Ray had always been my biggest supporter, understanding the demands of my profession without complaint. That's why, when I came home one sunny April afternoon to find her note, the world as I knew it shattered in an instant. The note was heartbreakingly simple, yet its weight was suffocating. Ben, I'm leaving for a while. I don't know how long I'll be gone. None of this is your fault. I've met someone. Please don't try to reach me. I need to do this. With love. Ray. I read it over and over again, hoping, somehow, the words might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But they didn't. My wife of 21 years had vanished from my life, leaving behind nothing but those few haunting sentences. How was it possible? One moment, everything felt stable, routine, even, and in the next, I was staring at a reality I couldn't comprehend. Let me back up a little. My name's Ben Miller. Ray, short for Rachel, has been a part of my life since childhood. Our parents worked together, so we occasionally crossed paths growing up, but we didn't really connect until college. By then, we were at different schools but ran into each other at a mutual friend's party. What started as a casual reconnection quickly blossomed into something deeper. By senior year, we were inseparable, living together and dreaming about the future. We married the summer after graduation and embarked on a journey we thought would last forever. Ray is vibrant, with a natural energy that lights up any room. She's a blonde with piercing blue eyes and an athletic build, always up for a challenge, whether it's a hike, a volleyball game, or her beloved aerobics classes. As for me, I'm of average height and build, with brown hair and eyes, a contrast to her brightness but complementary in its own way. I've poured my energy into building my own law firm, a career I'm proud of, while Ray has thrived as a nurse manager at a local hospital. We've shared an active lifestyle, balancing gym sessions and weekend hikes with the occasional Netflix binge. Our kids, Josh and Emily, are now in college. Josh is 19, and Emily, a freshman, is 18. They've always been the center of our world. That day, the day everything changed, was bright and warm, the kind of spring afternoon that makes you believe in endless possibilities. I remember stepping into the house, expecting the usual hum of our life together, only to be met with silence. And then, I saw the note. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I called Josh. My hands trembled as I dialed, and when he answered, I wasted no time. Josh, I said, my voice breaking, your mom left. She's gone. There was a pause on the other end. What? What do you mean, gone? His confusion mirrored my own, but I pushed forward. She left a note, I replied, my throat tightening as I read it to him aloud. I think she's left me, just like that, I said, my voice trembling as I finished explaining the situation to Josh. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he finally spoke. I can't believe this. I'm shocked, Dad, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Stay strong, son, I replied, trying to sound calm despite the chaos swirling in my head. "I'll keep you updated." After hanging up, I took a deep breath and called Emily. Her reaction was different, less surprised, almost resigned. "Emily, did you know your mom was planning to leave?" I asked, my tone laced with urgency. She hesitated before answering. "Not exactly, no. But I noticed something." "What do you mean? Who is this guy she's with?" I pressed, desperate for any shred of information. Emily sighed on the other end of the line. "I saw her having lunch with someone from work a few times. I asked her about it, and she said he was just a friend. His name is William Carter." "You had suspicions, didn't you?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. She paused, guilt creeping into her tone. "I didn't think much of it at the time, Dad." She seemed a little off when I brought it up, but I let it go. "I'm sorry. I should have told you." "It's not your fault, Emily," I reassured her, though my heart ached. "I'll take care of it. Don't worry." After those calls, I knew I couldn't just sit around. I opened my laptop and started researching this William Carter. It didn't take long to find out he's a cardiologist, formerly employed at the same hospital where Rachel works. According to his profile, he's 40, divorced, and has transitioned into administrative roles over the last 2 years. His name was also linked to a case 3 years ago, a high-profile incident involving a patient who died during surgery. From what I could gather, he's tall, stocky, and fair-haired. But when I tried to dig deeper, like finding his current job or address, I hit a wall. Frustrated but undeterred, I called my old friend Mike, who's a whiz with computers. If anyone could help track them down, it was him. "Mike, I need your help," I said the moment he picked up. "What's going on, Ben?" he asked, his concern evident. "Ray's gone. I think she's with someone named William Carter. I need you to help me find them," I explained, my words tumbling out in a rush. Mike didn't hesitate. "All right, I'll dig into it and let you know what I find." After hanging up, I decided to check our financial accounts. If Rachel was gone, there was no telling how far she might have gone to cut ties. I opened our bank app and scanned through the transactions. Her personal checking account hadn't been touched, but something else caught my eye. Her direct deposit from work hadn't gone through this month, a glaring red flag. Then came the real gut punch: she had withdrawn nearly all the money from our joint savings account, over $200,000 from our Vanguard account. The reality of it all started to settle in. Rachel wasn't just leaving, she was erasing herself from our shared life. I stared at the screen, the emptiness of the accounts reflecting the hollowness I felt inside. I called Mike again and gave him the account details to trace the transaction. "I'll get right on it," Mike assured me before we hung up. Sitting in silence for a moment, I decided it was time to visit Rachel's parents, Dan and Linda Benson, who lived about 30 miles away. If anyone could give me answers, it would be them. When I pulled up to their house, both of their cars were in the driveway. Dan opened the door almost immediately after I knocked, greeting me with a wary expression. He led me into the kitchen, where Linda was seated at the table, her hands clasped tightly together. "Hello, Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you know that I don't?" Dan sighed, his tone resigned as he spoke first. "We knew Ray was heading down a risky path, Ben. She confided everything to Linda, but she didn't want to hurt you." "She didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated bitterly. "She left me a note, emptied our savings, and ran off with another man. That doesn't sound like someone trying to avoid hurt." Linda's face fell, and she added quietly, "She didn't want it to be like this. We agreed not to say anything until she had a chance to talk to you herself." "Well, she didn't give me any chance," I exclaimed, unable to contain my frustration. "She stole over $200,000 from our savings. If she doesn't return at least half of it soon, I'll consider having her arrested." I'm not going to let her or this William Carter get away with this. Ben, please, Linda said, trying to stay calm. Don't use that kind of language. This isn't going to help. Dan jumped in, his tone firmer. She thinks Carter is her future husband, Ben. I stared at him, stunned. Do you believe that too? Because I consider him a thief, at the very least of money, and probably more. Linda sighed, her voice tinged with guilt. We met him about a month ago. She introduced him as a colleague, but it was clear there was more going on. You knew? I asked, my anger rising with every word. You knew, and you didn't warn me. We thought she'd come to her senses and talk to you first, Dan said defensively. We didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. I shook my head in disbelief. I'll find her in a few days, I said coldly. And when I do, she'd better be ready to explain everything. Just then, my phone rang. It was Mike. I stepped out of the kitchen to take the call. Ben, I found them, Mike said. Rachel and Carter both took jobs at a hospital in Pittsburgh. They're renting an apartment near the hospital, and they've set up a joint checking account with some money in it. What about the $200,000? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. It hasn't shown up yet, he replied. I suspect they moved it offshore. If that's the case, it'll be much harder to trace. Can you track it? I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. It'll be tough, and it's going to cost more, Mike warned. Do whatever it takes, I said firmly. Keep me posted. I hung up and leaned against the wall, my head spinning. The betrayal had deepened, and I knew this was only the beginning of unraveling the mess Rachel had left behind. I glanced at Linda and Dan, who were watching me closely as I jotted down the details Mike had given me. After a moment of silence, Linda finally spoke, her voice shaky. When she wants to come back, will you take her back? I stared at her, the question hitting me like a ton of bricks. Why would you even think she'd want to come back? It seems like she's made it pretty clear she wants a clean break, no contact. Tears welled up in Linda's eyes, and she shook her head. I think she'll want to return, Ben. I sighed, struggling to contain the swirl of emotions inside me. If she came back now and apologized, maybe we could try counseling, I said cautiously. But the longer she stays with him, living as his wife, well, you know what that means. Linda broke down, tears streaming down her face, and Dan reached over to comfort her. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what else to say, then decided it was time to leave. Goodbye, I said stiffly, and made my way back to my car. On the drive back to my office, my mind raced. Just as I was about to walk inside, my phone buzzed again. It was Mike. I've got more news, he said. I did a quick search. Infidelity isn't a crime in Pennsylvania, but in Virginia, it's classified as a misdemeanor. I filed that information away, my legal mind instinctively noting its potential relevance, even if it didn't ease the ache in my chest. As I often did when faced with a difficult situation, I decided to call my mentor, Uncle Jack. Jack is my mom's older brother and lives nearby in D.C. He's a retired lawyer who now works as a lobbyist, but to me, he's always been more of a life coach than a legal advisor. I reached out to him, and we agreed to catch up over dinner. Before heading to his place, I made a quick stop at a clinic for a series of tests for sexually transmitted diseases, a grim but necessary precaution. Afterward, I picked up some pizza and beer. When I arrived at Jack's home, he greeted me at the door, his familiar warm smile a welcome sight. The house hadn't changed a bit since I was a kid. It was a place filled with memories of simpler times. Jack's life had changed in recent years. His wife, Ellen, had passed away from pneumonia 5 years ago after 40 wonderful years of marriage. Since then, he'd had a few relationships, but none had lasted. Now, it was just him in the big, quiet house. What brings a busy lawyer to this old place? He asked, a hint of humor in his voice. I needed a distraction, I said, trying to sound casual as I handed him the pizza and beer. Jack didn't miss a beat. He studied me for a moment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you want her back? I hesitated, the weight of his words settling over me. I want my old life back, I admitted. But that feels impossible. Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful as we sat down to eat. Then the question isn't whether you want her back, Ben. It's whether you can build a life worth living, even if she doesn't come back. I stared at him, unsure how to respond, and realized he might be right. I'm not sure I even want her back, I admitted to Jack, staring at the untouched slice of pizza on my plate. If she could do this once, what's stopping her from doing it again? And honestly, I don't even know if I can survive this a second time. Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You don't need to make that decision right now, Ben. This kind of betrayal isn't something you get over in a week. You need time to process everything, and you might need help to do that. All you've ever done is help me, Jack, I replied. You've always been someone I could rely on. Jack smiled faintly, shaking his head. Maybe. But I'm not the role model you think I am. Since Ellen passed, I've been stumbling through my own mistakes, trying to figure things out. I'm still having fun, sure, but that's not exactly wisdom. I chuckled, appreciating his honesty, but I could feel the weight of exhaustion settling over me. My mind was racing from everything that had happened, and my body was barely keeping up. Eventually, I hit my breaking point. Jack must have noticed because he gently eased me onto the couch and draped an old oriental robe over me. I was out like a light. When I woke up the next morning, the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. I rolled off the couch, still shaky, but my hunger outweighed my fatigue. Jack had prepared a simple but hearty breakfast, bacon, eggs, and toast. We ate quietly, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. After breakfast, I took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away some of the heaviness that clung to me. I threw on a clean tracksuit Jack had lent me and decided to head into my office. Work had always been my refuge, and I hoped it could give me some semblance of normalcy. Miraculously, I managed to get some work done, staying focused through the morning and even having lunch at my desk. But as the clock neared 5:30, I knew I couldn't avoid going home any longer. When I walked through the door, I noticed Rachel's absence in more ways than one. She had taken some clothes and personal items, but most of her belongings were still scattered around the house, little pieces of the life we had built together. It was surreal, almost like she had left in a rush, halfway through packing. I decided to take control of the situation. I drove to Lowe's, bought boxes and tape, and began systematically packing up her things. Clothes, books, photo albums, shoes, everything went into the boxes. I stacked them neatly in the garage, which had plenty of space now that Rachel's car was gone. Once I finished, I called Mike. Rachel took her car, I told him, giving him another update. Her stuff is out of the house now. Got it. I'll keep you posted if anything changes on my end, he said before we hung up. Later that evening, I went over the latest report from the private investigator I had hired. It was a grim confirmation of everything I feared. Even before Rachel vanished, rumors about her and Carter had already started circulating. A neighbor had seen them leaving a motel in the middle of the day, while a waitress at a nearby restaurant spotted them kissing in the parking lot. It seemed the entire town had pieced things together before I did. The investigator had tracked down rental records for several motels. In the weeks leading up to her departure, Rachel had rented a room 3 times, each for just a few hours, always paying in cash. He even had copies of the receipts and photos of Carter's license plates in the parking lot. The evidence was undeniable. Rachel had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. I felt a strange mixture of anger and numbness as I stared at the file. She had been orchestrating her escape while I'd been obliviously working, completely unaware of the cracks forming beneath our lives. I learned that the temporary restraining order, TRO, hearing was scheduled for the following Monday and that Rachel had already been served at her new job in Pittsburgh. While I didn't need Mildred, my family lawyer, to handle the TRO, my firm was more than capable of managing that. I did ask her about what to expect in the divorce proceedings. Mildred spent some time gathering financial data and poring over the details of our case. Rachel doesn't appear to be in a great financial position, she explained. Thanks to the prenup, your law firm is protected and off the table. She'll likely get half the value of the house and any other assets you've accumulated during the marriage. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it still stung. Half of everything we built together, gone, just like that. Later that evening, I spoke to Emily on the phone. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the strain beneath it. During our conversation, I heard a man's voice in the background, muffled but unmistakably angry. Who was that? I asked. It's nothing to worry about, Emily replied quickly. I promise, Dad. I wanted to believe her, but there was nothing I could do from where I was. I changed the subject, asking about her classes and a new friend she had mentioned. By the time we hung up, I felt slightly reassured, though the unease lingered. The weekend was a whirlwind of activity as I prepared for Monday, the day of the TRO hearing in the morning and a counseling session in the afternoon. I spoke briefly to Josh, who told me he still hadn't heard from his mother. After our call, I decided to head to the gym to clear my head. While I was there, I ran into Rachel's close friend, Clara. She was running on the treadmill, and our eyes met in the mirror. She noticed me watching and smiled coyly. I smiled back, feeling an unfamiliar warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. She adjusted the speed on her treadmill, her pace accentuating her curves, her confidence palpable. Caught in the moment, I blew her a playful kiss and left the gym. But even as I walked out, I couldn't shake the memory of our exchange. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than pain, hope, excitement, and a sense of possibility. The thought of Clara lifted my spirits in a way I hadn't expected. It had been so long since I'd felt truly seen or desired, and the realization was both thrilling and bittersweet. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it might feel like to start fresh, to step into a new chapter unburdened by the pain of betrayal. I wasn't naive, I knew it wasn't the time to jump into anything serious. But Clara's presence was a reminder that life could move forward, even after everything. I can't say for sure, I replied with a chuckle, my heart racing. Clara had a way of making me feel alive, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about Rachel or the weight of the past few weeks. It was as if the world outside didn't exist, just the two of us, caught in this moment of connection and release. Afterward, we lay there quietly, catching our breath. Clara rested her head on my chest, her playful demeanor softening into something more relaxed and intimate. I must have drifted off for a while because the next thing I knew, she was nudging me awake. Go grab your things and come back, she whispered with a mischievous smile. You can shower here. I got up, pulled on my clothes, and headed back to the gym to collect my bag. By the time I returned, the sky had grown dark, and the lights from her apartment glowed warmly against the night. Stepping back inside, I felt a strange mix of calm and exhilaration, as if a piece of my life had suddenly been set free. As the night went on, Clara and I shared pizza and a few more beers, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. At one point, the conversation turned serious. Do you think Rachel will ever ask you to take her back? Clara asked, her tone thoughtful. I paused, considering the question. I'm not sure, I admitted. She might. But then again, she might be too ashamed or think it's too late. Clara nodded, her expression one of quiet understanding. I'll tell you this, Ben, she's been with that guy for a while. That's not something I could ever forgive. Your relationship might be beyond repair. I know, I said, the words heavy in my throat. I've been trying to accept that. She reached out, her hand resting gently on mine. Well, big guy, whatever happens, you know where to find me. And I promise, I'll do my best to keep you on your toes." Her playful smile was contagious, and I found myself laughing despite the lingering ache of loss. There was something refreshing about Clara's honesty, her ability to lighten even the heaviest moments. As the evening wore on, we found ourselves on the couch again, talking about life and everything in between. I realized I didn't have all the answers yet, maybe I never would. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again, like the future wasn't just a vast, empty unknown. Clara had never been to my house before, and as she stepped inside, I saw her looking around, taking in the details of my home. While she explored, I managed to finish a bit of work, appreciating the lightness she brought with her. After wrapping up, I went upstairs to change into clean shorts and a fresh shirt. It was Sunday, so I turned on the baseball game. When I mentioned it, Clara's face lit up. Turns out, she was a huge fan, just like me. We sat together on the couch, completely engrossed in the game, chatting about players and stats. For nearly an hour, it was just the two of us and the game, sharing the kind of easy excitement that reminded me life could feel normal again. As the game played on, I found myself drawn to her. I leaned closer, and soon enough, we made our way upstairs to the master bedroom, where the connection between us deepened in a way that felt as much about comfort as passion. The next morning, we were still talking and laughing about the night before as we shared breakfast. Clara had this uncanny ability to make me feel like everything could be okay, even if just for a while. As I prepared for my day, I told her, it's time for me to head to court, and therapy. Though, honestly, I feel like I don't need it quite as much now. Still, I'll go. She smirked. If you're here when I get back, I'll cook dinner again, I added. I'll be here, she replied with a grin. Fully dressed? Maybe. But more likely, not. We both laughed, and I kissed her before driving her home. Later that morning, I found myself standing in court with a lawyer from my firm. Across the room, William and Rachel arrived with their attorney, while Vanguard's legal team also took their places. Judge Coulson entered and took his seat on the bench, his presence commanding the room to attention. Rachel looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, her confidence stripped away. William hovered close to her, his hand brushing hers as if offering reassurance. The air in the room felt heavy, each side waiting for the proceedings to begin. The Vanguard lawyer addressed the judge first. Your Honor, the attempted transfer of funds was directed to a local bank account under the name of William Carter, he stated. The judge nodded and asked, have you identified the computer used for the transfer attempt? No, Your Honor. That's beyond our current capabilities at this time, the lawyer replied. Judge Coulson turned his attention to Rachel. Mrs. Miller, please take the oath, he instructed. Rachel visibly recoiled, her shoulders slumping, her face pale as the clerk approached her. She hesitated, and William immediately stepped forward. Your Honor, I'm just here to support Rachel. I don't want to be involved in this, he said, his voice tense. Judge Coulson's expression hardened. Please comply, he said firmly. William hesitated for a moment longer but eventually relented, giving his name and address as required. Rachel glanced at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and unease, but I stayed focused, determined not to let her actions shake my resolve. As the proceedings continued, I felt the enormity of the situation settle in. This was only the beginning of what would undoubtedly be a long and grueling process. Still, I held on to a growing sense of determination. Whatever it took, I was going to secure what was rightfully mine and move forward with my life. I already knew most of the information being presented, but I stayed focused as Judge Coulson continued. He turned to my lawyer and asked, is Mr. Miller planning to file for divorce? Yes, Your Honor, my lawyer replied. The paperwork has been prepared and will be filed this week. The judge nodded and issued his ruling. Vanguard is ordered to freeze the account until a family law court can review the assets. This matter will be addressed during the divorce proceedings. As the hearing adjourned, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything bearing down on me. My mind churned with thoughts of Rachel and William, but the overwhelming emotions hardened into something sharper when Rachel approached me as I exited the courtroom. "Ben, can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I turned to face her, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After everything? You've been sleeping with that idiot for months behind my back. You left without even speaking to me. You moved in with him like he's your husband. And now you want to talk?" Rachel flinched but didn't back down. "Can't we go somewhere more private?" she pleaded. "What about the kids?" "The kids? They're angry with you, Rachel, and you know it. They're hurt, and they have every right to be," I said firmly. "Do you even have a real reason for throwing me away like I'm nothing? Like I'm a used napkin?" Her shoulders sagged under the weight of the conversation. "No," she admitted after a moment. "If you'd asked me before, I would have told you I thought he was my soulmate. I thought leaving like that, making a clean break, would be easier for you. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about everything." The bitterness inside me swirled, but I held my ground. "Wrong doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, my voice cold. I walked away, determined not to let her words linger longer than they had to. It was clear Rachel was still grappling with her choices, but I couldn't let myself be dragged into her spiral of regret and indecision. After leaving court, I decided it was time to see the therapist I'd scheduled earlier. I grabbed lunch at Subway, a hot tuna sandwich with melted cheese, and made my way to the counselor's office. Mary Stevens, the marriage counselor, welcomed me with a warm smile. At first glance, she looked like a typical gray-haired grandmother, but there was something striking about her. As she crossed the room to shake my hand, she moved with a certain athletic grace that belied her age. Her demeanor was calm, yet her presence was commanding. I liked her immediately. "I should clarify," she began as we sat down, "I'm a counselor focused on relationships and their outcomes. If necessary, I'll help you navigate this chapter, whether it means reconciliation or moving forward." Her words settled over me as I tried to process everything that had happened over the past few weeks. While I wasn't entirely sure what I needed from therapy, I knew I had to start somewhere. Mary raised an eyebrow when I mentioned Clara but quickly smiled, a smile I'd already noted was one of her most disarming qualities. "So, you're clearly attracted to Clara," she said, leaning forward slightly. "That's not surprising, given everything you've been through. But let's make sure you're approaching this wisely. You're especially vulnerable right now, emotionally and physically. Someone in your situation could easily become prey to someone who sees an opportunity." I tensed, ready to defend Clara, but Mary held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not saying Clara's feelings aren't genuine, and I'm certainly not doubting yours. But relationships that start in situations like this can sometimes be one-dimensional. My advice? Take the time to get to know her better, beyond just the attraction. Have real conversations when you're both in the right headspace." "I'm sure we'll find the time," I replied with a smirk. Mary chuckled. "You're quick, Ben, I'll give you that. But Clara mentioned she's always found you attractive. That's a start, but it's not the whole picture." The conversation shifted as Mary brought up Rachel again. Rachel's youngest, Emily, went off to college. "You were busy with work. It's possible she felt left behind, maybe even old or irrelevant." "That could have been a factor," Mary suggested gently. "Maybe," I admitted, "but if that's how she felt, she should have talked to me about it. Instead, she decided to run off and play house with some complete idiot, a thief, no less." Mary nodded, her expression thoughtful. "What would you have done if she had come to you and said she felt lost or tempted? Or even worse, if she admitted she'd already given in to temptation?" I didn't hesitate. If she'd told me she felt lost or tempted, I would have helped her. Maybe we would have come to you together to work through it. But if she'd already crossed that line? I don't know, Mary. That's different. Mary stayed quiet for a moment, letting my words hang in the air, before moving the conversation forward. Later that evening, back at Clara's apartment, the atmosphere was more relaxed. She was wearing shorts and nothing else, and I did my best not to let my eyes wander. "Fine," she said with a teasing smile, "just a second." She grabbed a t-shirt and slipped it on. "Thank you," I said, relieved to be able to focus on our conversation. "Maybe now we can talk," I suggested, gesturing for her to sit beside me. "Maybe," she replied, sitting down and studying me. "What do you want to talk about?" I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "Something important. I saw a psychotherapist today, after the court hearing. We talked about everything. Including us." Clara tilted her head, curious but not defensive. "What did they say?" I took a deep breath, knowing this was a pivotal moment. "They said we need to take our time, that it's important for us to really get to know each other, beyond the physical stuff. And honestly, I think they're right." Clara nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That's fair," she said softly. "And for what it's worth, I'd like that too." I told Mary about the intensity of what Clara and I had been experiencing. She nodded thoughtfully and said, "It sounds like what's sometimes called sexual hypercompatibility. Essentially, you might feel physically obsessed with each other right now. It's not uncommon after significant emotional upheaval." Her words made sense. Clara and I had been caught up in a whirlwind, but there was also something deeper developing between us. During our conversations, Clara had shared more about her life, her college years, past relationships, and what led her to where she was now. After graduating, she'd broken up with her college boyfriend and focused on her nursing career. She had married a doctor, a gynecologist, and for a while, she thought they had built a happy life together. "But he cheated on me," Clara said, her voice steady but reflective. "And he wasn't discreet about it. I found out, confronted him, and he apologized. I tried to save the marriage, but it was a mistake. A year later, he cheated again." Her eyes softened as she continued. "After our divorce, I got a good settlement, and he moved his practice to New York. I haven't seen or spoken to him since. I admired her strength, and her willingness to be so open helped me reflect on my own situation. As I shared with Mary later, Clara wasn't just someone who made me feel alive again, she was someone I wanted to truly get to know, beyond the intensity of our initial connection." We talked about Clara's love for baseball and how much she knew about the sport, something I'd only recently discovered. I told Mary that while it would take time to fully understand Clara, I was eager to try. Our conversation then shifted back to my marriage. Mary reminded me that processing everything emotionally would take time. She asked how I felt about William Carter, and I realized I hadn't given him much thought lately. Reflecting on it now, my feelings could be summed up in 3 words: contempt, anger, and pity. Over the following months, Rachel and I maintained occasional contact. We spoke on the phone here and there, mostly about the kids. Once, during one of our conversations, I told her about Clara. Rachel sighed heavily. "That girl has always wanted you," she said, bitterness creeping into her voice. "I should have seen it. I'm such an idiot." I didn't argue, but her words lingered. It was clear that Rachel was grappling with her own regrets, but I had moved on. As for Clara, she moved into my house, and I bought out Rachel's share to make it truly ours. Over time, the overwhelming intensity of our connection mellowed into something steadier, more enduring. I told Clara I loved her and wanted our relationship to continue, but I made it clear, I wasn't interested in getting married again. The scars of my past made me wary, but Clara understood. Rachel's new life didn't turn out as planned. From what I heard, William self-destructed. He went bankrupt, lost his medical license, and now worked at a gas station in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, Clara and I built something lasting. We had 2 children together, Linda and Stephen, named in honor of her father, who had been an incredible man in her life. Our compatibility never faded, and I believe it never will.